Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Ian and I are here, and then I know we have several on the Zoom call, and we're also streaming. So welcome to our continued study of the Gospel of Matthew. Tonight, we are going to be looking at Matthew 25. And the question that I have here is very specific, and it's related to Matthew 24. So you're like, hey, why are we starting in the former chapter? So the question is, did Jesus answer the disciples' questions about the destruction of the temple in the end of times? The reason I ask that is because this is exactly a continuation of his answer. So let us go ahead and dive into it and remind ourselves where we are. So in Matthew 24, 1 through 3, then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." The disciples' questions, verse 3. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, Jesus, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So, again, chapter 24 and chapter 25, it's all a continuation. The chapter breaks are artificial. We can't look at that. So as I click through this, thank you, Daniel, for preparing 2 slides for me. So where's Jesus leaving from? He's leaving from the temple in verse 1. He's on Mount Olives talking to his disciples. When will these things happen? A reminder, these things refer to the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, or is it the end of times? Or is it the sign of your return? So there are actually 3 different questions, and I think he answers all 3 of them. So when we look at what Daniel shared with us on Sunday, your coming and the end of times, they thought were basically the same thing. So as we look through our chapter 25, we're going to want to talk through this. Okay, which one is it? Is it the end of times, or is it the sign of Jesus coming, or are they one and the same at this point? Or is it referring back to the disciples' question about when will the temple be destroyed? So the only thing I want to add on to this slide is a question. What does chapter 23, verse 38 show us? And the quote is Jesus telling the Pharisees, remember, this is the woe passage back in chapter 23. "See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So again, I think those actually go really well with chapter 24 and 25, because you shall see me no more. Well, they're going to see him when they arrest him in the Garden of Gethsemane. They're going to see him when they try him in chapters 26 to 27 that we're going to get into on Sunday beginning. So yeah, they're going to see him again, but actually I think Jesus is foretelling the fact that he's going to be coming again all the way back into chapter 23. Now the tie-in here is that 38, your house is left to you desolate, the Pharisees. Just as he declares the Pharisees have left the temple, Jesus also in chapter 24 has left the temple and will no longer come back in a manner of a teacher. So there are lots of lasts and firsts that are going on here. So let me just have you all think about that for sure. We talked about the last question from the Pharisees, chapter 22, verse 41. The last address to the multitudes, chapter 23. The last time in the temple, chapter 24. So when we go on to chapter 25, which we're finally going to get to, there were just 3 days left in Jesus' ministry at this point. So no longer is he teaching the multitudes like he did on his way into Jerusalem. Now he's really focused in on his disciples, and I think also probably mentally preparing himself for what he's about to endure. The only thing that I want to highlight here, and again, I love Daniel's slides, is the fact that I have added at the bottom in teaching number 5, we hear about the condemnation to the Pharisees and scribes. We hear about that in chapter 23. In chapter 25, I think we're going to see the difference between the judgment and the going into everlasting punishment, which he also declared upon the Pharisees at the end of chapter 23 and verse 33, 34. But now we're going to see hope for the disciples, hope for those who follow Jesus. So now we're going to have a nice contrast between, if you do this, here's your end. If you do this, here's your destination. And we're going to talk about that as we go through this. So there's going to be a little bit of the condemnation side, because we all need to hear that. The disciples needed to hear that. But as we go through this, let's focus on the hope, and let's think about how we can apply it to our lives. So, okay, jumping into the text, and then we'll open it up for discussion in the next few slides. So we're going to read chapter 25, verses 1 through 13. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins, who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, No, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went out to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins also came, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. So the questions which I forgot to ask you all as we went through that, these questions were all answered in these parables from the end of 24 into 25, and then the talents in the middle of 25. And then we're going to have a lesson, a teaching at the end of 25. So remember what the questions were. When is the temple going to be destroyed? And when are you coming? Or when is the end, the sign of the end of the age? So what verse in chapter 25 tells us which question he's answering? I will pause there for a minute, and then we're going to dissect the parable.
Robert, it's Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
The similarity in language, I would say, well, just generally the language of the bridegroom coming seems to harken back to what he described as the coming of the Son of Man in chapter 24. And then very specifically in verse 13 of chapter 25, all of that is verbatim from chapter 24 as well. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour. He had said back in chapter 24 that, even the Son of Man didn't know the day or the hour, and he had said multiple times, I believe, to be on the alert. So there's a connection there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then the question for you is, which specific question is he answering when we hear the Son of Man is coming? Is that the end of the age, or the return of Jesus, or both, or something else?
Yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time knowing exactly. 25 as it goes along seems to be so, especially by the end of the chapter, so clearly about the end, the end of the age when Jesus returns that time. But obviously the language is similar to chapter 24, in which he seemed to be using the coming of the Son of Man to describe the destruction of Jerusalem. So.
And maybe the answer is both. That's the easy cop-out, but perhaps it's a transition where you have a couple of parables that could be interpreted in two different ways as you go from the focus on the end of the temple in Jerusalem to the end of the times. So I'm gonna pause there. Just for sake of transparency, I'm gonna be treating all of these in chapter 25 as the end of the age. It just feels like that's what it is to me. I don't think it changes the interpretation. It doesn't change the teaching that Jesus is providing. I don't think it does. And if it does, please, that's why we're here to talk and learn. But that's where my head is, and then that's how I'm going to present it. So if you have different perspectives, that's fine. Again, we're in Bible class. The whole point of this is so that we can have a discourse and talk to each other about that. So as we go forward here, I've got a couple of columns and questions. And the question is, what did the maidens have in common? And go ahead and shout them out, and I'll click through these.
They all had lamps.
Good. I'll go ahead and I'll give you the first one. They were all virgins, or described as virgins. And again, not so much the sexual part of that by chance, but I think it's more the faithful, right? Just the innocence that they represent. But perhaps it's both. Okay, I heard lamps. What else?
They all went to sleep.
Okay, all the lamps are lit, so they're all doing their part. What else?
They all went out to meet the bridegroom.
Sorry, say it again.
They all went out to meet the bridegroom.
Okay, I like that. They're all present to meet the groom. They all fall asleep before he comes. Again, this is the danger of having a sequential list. All awaken when he's announced. Hey, the bridegroom's here. They all awake. What else do they do?
They all want to be with the bridegroom.
Yep, they all arise and light their lamps. And that's all I have for commonalities. So did I miss any? Okay, so what's different? And this is really the only part that we ever focus on, the difference. There's one word that starts with a P that I'm thinking of.
Prudent.
Prudent.
Preparation.
What was that, Michael?
Preparation.
Thank you. Michael reads my mind. I assume Daniel was the one who came up with prudent. So they were all prepared. They were all ready. I'm sorry, they were not all prepared the same way. They were partly prepared the same way, but prudent is probably the better P word that should go in here. And there are a couple of other differences that will come out as we dissect the second half. So what do they represent? And this time I don't give you the answers. So let's talk about these. What does the bridegroom represent in this parable? And I'll accept Daniel's answers if no one wants to give me mine.
Is the bridegroom Jesus?
I think the bridegroom is Jesus. And what happens? The bridegroom comes when? What did they know about the timing of the bridegroom?
They did not know when he was going to come.
They did not know when the bridegroom was coming. They had an idea, but they did not know when. So my thought is this is Christ's return. We don't know when Christ is returning. We'll get to our applications in a minute. Who do the wise maidens represent?
Those who will be redeemed, who will have eternal life in the end with God and with Jesus.
Yep. Those disciples who are prepared, who are ready, who are diligent, who have thought through, have followed his orders, have prepared for any eventuality. You can't just be righteous for 20 years and then the next 20 years not be righteous and then, oh, I'm going to die in 6 months, be righteous again. Now, it might work out that way, but you're not guaranteed tomorrow. We have all sorts of songs like that. So the wise maidens, in this case, are the disciples who are prepared for any eventuality. What do the foolish maidens represent?
I think they're exactly what you just described. People that take for granted that they're okay, or I say they. I mean, we can easily fall into this mentality that, oh, we'll be okay. The preparation is unnecessary, so on and so forth. It's maybe the fool from Proverbs, that's more focused on the moment than on the consequences that are out there in the invisible future.
Agreed. It's the opposite of the wise, those who weren't ready. What does the messenger represent? Have we ever thought about that? Because I have two more, the messenger and the doorkeeper. What does the messenger mean to you? Do we believe that there's going to be a messenger for Christ's return? Again, assuming that we take my interpretation for now. Are we going to get forewarning? Let us turn over to 2 Peter 3, 10 through 11. 2 Peter 3, 10 through 11. And there are probably other passages, but that's the one I wanted to share. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So let's focus in on 10 through 12. Once we see, again, it's described for us, once we see the day of the Lord and the elements are melting away, the heavens will pass away, the earth will melt with fervent heat, it'll come with a great noise. Is that the messenger? Could be. Anyone else have a different interpretation?
Yeah, I think that's probably correct. I was looking for the word messenger in my translation, and I don't see it, but I think you're referring to, is it verse 6, when there's a cry, here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him?
Oh, yes, pardon me.
Okay.
Thank you. Verse 6.
Okay. Yeah, that would make sense. So it's like, you can tell that Jesus is coming, but, at this point, it's like everybody's going to want to try to make right, but anyhow, I'll let you carry it on.
Yeah, exactly. So in the interest of time, the doorkeeper. Doorkeeper, I'm referring to basically verse 10. And when they went out to buy, the bridegroom came. Those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. So who's the doorkeeper in this case?
It sounds like it's the same person as the bridegroom, the way he addressed them. I never knew you, which of course reminds us of Matthew 7 and what's said there about, a similar judgment scene, or what Jesus himself said in John 10 about I am the door, and, kind of opening to whom he wills.
I'm right there with you. Okay, so now we've got the characters and who they represent. What lessons can we learn? What do we know about the timing of the return? Verse 5.
We don't know.
We don't know. What do we know about the... So and then we'll come to the conclusion. We don't know the timing. What do we know about preparation? Important or not?
It's very important.
Very important. I think we actually got that twice in 2 Peter 3, verse 10 and 11. I think we hear about, because this is going to be the sign, it'll be too late, therefore you should live in a righteous manner. So I think we have that lesson twice. What about the timing of the return? I think I just gave it away. In 2 Peter, once you see that sign or hear that messenger or hear the great noise, is there time to do anything about it? Is there time to change your life at that point?
No, there's not.
I think it's intended to make us realize at that point, this is it. This is the judgment. And then here, I think it's a little bit easier to interpret that with, hey, when I came, the guests, maids, were there. I greeted you, and I came into the inner chamber, right? Into heaven. Anybody else that comes after I come back, I don't know you. And we're going to see that theme show up again as well. And then finally, judgment is final. Verse 11 and 12, I do not know you. And then the conclusion, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. And again, that message is repeated a couple of times, and we see it in the, well, we're about to see it in the next parable. We see it in the teaching at the end of 25. So you have that same lesson 3 times in one chapter, and then we saw it in 2 Peter 3. Okay, any other thoughts before we move on to the parable of the talents from the wedding? Okay, awesome. Here we go. I'm going to read, but I'm going to click first. What are these talents? Does it change the lesson being taught? So Matthew 25, 14 through 30. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, and to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought another 5 talents, saying, Look, Lord, you delivered to me 5. Look, I have gained 5 more besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the day of the joy of your Lord. He also who had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even that which he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, first question. Which of the disciples' questions is Jesus answering here? My title makes me think it's the end of times, the judgment scene. So first question, what's a talent? And does it matter?
It's a monetary unit, isn't it?
Thank you. I'll take the first answer. It was the one I had. Simply unit of weight, and the value is determined by the metal. So a talent of gold is worth more than a talent of silver versus bronze. And again, we see this in verse 18. He hid the talent in the ground. You can't hide your talent, whatever that might be. Well, you can hide it, but it would be figurative. I don't think it matters at the end of the day, but let's assume it's money. Actions taken. So I'll give you the first one, and then I'll go through the next four together. I want you to notice that this is very similar to verse 25. The early part of chapter 25. Here it was in verse 5, 25:5. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. They didn't know when the bridegroom was coming back. What do we see here in this part of chapter 25 in the parable of the talents? What verse tells us that we don't know when the time is going to come? So it says verse 15, but you're like, well, I don't get it. So he went on a journey in verse 15, but when did he come back in verse 19? After a long time. Yeah. So again, unknown period of time. So my hypothesis here is that as the master gave these slaves or servants talents that they can then manage for him while he's gone, so Christ has also left us with a job. And what is that job?
Well, using the imagery of the parable, it's like the Lord has given us things that really belong to him, but we're stewards of them. And he expects that when he returns, we'll have multiplied the things that belong to him. I mean, so this maybe connects to the language all throughout Matthew and the Bible of bearing fruit for the Lord. And so he finds us fruitful in that we have been productive. So you could think of that as growing the fruit of character, the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5. You could think of that as multiplying the people in his kingdom, fruit in that sense. But we've used what he's given us to produce more of what belongs to him when he returns.
And thank you for that. We see this a couple of times before we get there. The kingdom of heaven is like chapter 18, verse 23. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. Very similar imagery here around having expected them to do something. If you borrow money, I expect you to pay it back. And there's probably a time element with that. But also it picks up in chapter 21, verse 34, which says, now another parable in verse 33, a certain landowner, he leased it to vineyards and went away to a far country. When vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers that they might receive its fruit, right? So very similar imagery, different context, different thoughts, but to me it's the same. And if we think about that chapter 21 parable, in that chapter and then here, those servants that produced, what was the outcome for those that were productive or that actually, of course, chapter 21 is a bad example. So in this example, the talents, what was the outcome for those who were productive? He only says it twice.
So not only are they accepted of the master, they receive his approval, they also, interestingly, are given more responsibility. In verse 21, for instance, you were faithful with a few things, I will put you in charge of many things. So I'll let you tell us what that means exactly in the lesson for us. but the reward for being faithful is more responsibility.
Or it's more benefits. And we can talk about that too in a minute. So I went really simple with the slide. The servants that produce are rewarded. So in that parallel, what happens to those who don't produce? What happened to the servant who hid his talent?
He went to the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Also known as being punished. And then
Yes.
finally, and I think I already hit on this, Christ returns after a long time to settle accounts. And again, we're going to look at this more shortly in the next teaching. But verse 19, that was an example of he came and they settled accounts. And then did the servants know what the master expected? What do we see in verse 24? Someone read it?
Yeah, this one's interesting to me because the servant with the 1 talent says, "I knew you to be a hard man." Basically, I knew the expectations. What's interesting is the master says, "You were exactly right about that. You understood my character accurately, but you drew the wrong conclusion." His conclusion was, well, why even try? I know the harsh, maybe we'd say, I know the high expectations of the master, so why even try? The master says, you were right about the high expectations, therefore you should have at least done something to prove your worthiness or to make back even just a little bit for me.
Thank you. I want to build on that for a second because as we look at these parables, we move out of the woe are you Pharisees, woe are you scribes, and the condemnation of their behaviors and their false spirituality, etc. We move out of the weeping over Jerusalem. This, to me, we're moving now into that we saw at the end of 23. Now we're moving into this is how it is. This is how it's going to end. We're going to end with everyone being judged. We're going to end with knowing there's no excuse, there's no ignorance here. We know what God expects. We may be surprised, that's the next part of it, but we know what God expects. So the servant knew what God expected, what the master expected. There were no surprises here, except for the fact that he was punished because he thought he was good enough. He didn't meet the master's expectation. So one final slide here on the talents. I think God expects something from us. And I think we've talked about that already. I also think God expects us to produce according to our ability. I keep thinking back to the parables, not a parable, but the example of the church being a body. We've got a foot, we've got a hand, we've got an arm, we've got a leg. We need all parts of it. I may not enjoy going up and meeting strangers that come in amongst us, but there's some of us in this congregation that can do that without even blinking. They love that stuff. Thank you for being there, because now I don't have to do that part. I can go do some other part that I would prefer. I changed a couple of light bulbs. Yay, I'll do that all day long. I don't know that it really helps us that much, but I can see better. So whatever role that we have within the body, I think that we can also apply it back to this idea of God expects something from us. We need to not forsake what he expects. Does he expect more than we can do? No. Verse 27, at the very least, he says you should do this. But I also look at, verse 15, to each according to his own ability. And then God rewards based on the heart, not on production. Tell me what the language that the master talked to his servant in 21 and 23, what words are different in his praise for them? If I read it correctly, not a word. Every word is exactly the same. He who produced 5, he who produced 2 more. What about the parable of the vineyard? Those that came late to the party, that came late to the picking, what was their reward? Same, right? They got paid the same wages. So God rewards based on the heart and our acting in accordance with his will. And finally, God will punish based on our heart, as verse 26 and 30 show. Okay, 2 more slides, and then we'll call it done. I think we're okay on time. Let us read Matthew 25, 31 through 46. And the question is, as we've looked through the parable of the talents, the preparation for the wedding feast, does this teaching take on new meaning to us through that lens than maybe we've looked at it in the past? We've looked at it in isolation. So let us read together Matthew 25, 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of these, the least of my brethren, you did it to me." Then he will say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into everlasting life." Okay, I remember reading that when I was a small child, and I always thought about, does this mean that we need to help those around us? I don't know. We should talk through that as well. So I call this one Expectations and Judgment Revisited, because to me, this is exactly the same teaching, the same lessons that we learned in the parable of the talents. Tell me if you agree as we talk through this together in the next 5 minutes. What happens at the judgment scene? Who's going to be there? You'll have to pop in quick now.
All the angels.
Oh, okay. Who else?
The king, maybe also the Son of Man, maybe that's one and the same there. And then the sheep and the goats.
So I was
All
actually,
nations.
Thank you. That was what I was going for. All nations will be there, verse 32. But you're absolutely right. The king will be there. This is the judgment scene. I can't read it any other way. The king and his angels, the Son of Man, when they come in glory, this is the judgment scene to me. All nations will be there, verse 32. There will be a separation. A separation. How are they going to be separated? Think back to the talents. Those that were rewarded were called good and faithful servants. They will get the inheritance. Look at verse 34. Those on the right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Who are the other side? Those that were unfaithful, those that are going to inherit destruction. Verse 46. So here's the question. Was there confusion at the judgment? Was there confusion when the God or Christ explains why they're going to damnation and why they're inheriting the kingdom of heaven?
There does seem to be an element of surprise. Both groups ask, when did we do all these things that you claiming that we did or didn't do?
Yeah, the righteous said, okay, I didn't see that coming. What about the wicked? Same. What about those in the middle? What do they say? This would be so much easier in person. You're supposed to look at me and say, there was no one in the middle. There were only two sides here, the righteous and the not righteous. Okay, when did we do the following? If they were hungry, they got food. If they were thirsty, they got drink. If they were a stranger, they got housing. If they were naked, they got clothing. If they were sick, they were visited. If they were in prison, they were also visited or ministered to. That's the list. What lessons can we learn from this? And really, I'm going to show you the lessons, and then you can tell me how we're supposed to interpret them. Looks like we got about 3 minutes left. If you helped one of these, my brethren, you did it to me. If you did not help one of these, you did not do it to me. And you're going to be gifted with punishment or everlasting life. There is no middle. So let me pause there. That's all the material I have. Well, I have one conclusion, but I'll save that for the end because your conclusions are going to be better than mine. So are we missing something? Are we reading this too superficially? Or is this really the lesson of the talents and of the immediate parallel for us? What we're given as a talent, we need to use. If we don't use it, we're going to have punishment. To me, these are exactly parallel teachings. But again, I will pause for feedback.
Yeah, Robert, I think that's a good, and I mean, it's a necessary connection to make. You could read the parable of the talents and think, okay, I'm supposed to do something with what God has given me. And you can say, well, what am I supposed to do with what God has given me? And then the very next parable, Jesus explains and says, when there's sick people, you attend to their needs. When there's hungry people, you feed them, so on and so forth. And really, this is not anything new in the Gospel of Matthew. I mean, you could go back to the very first discourse, this now being the fifth, the end of the fifth. Well, right in the first one, Sermon on the Mount, there was lots of teaching about the way that you treat others, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with kindness, giving, turning the other cheek, forgiveness, withholding, hypocritical judgment, and then all the way throughout. I'm thinking back to even to 18 and the, not causing others to stumble, seeking your brother out when they've hurt you, forgiving over and over and over again. So this theme that Jesus ends on here, in a sense, in this final discourse of using what God has given us to treat our brothers and sisters, even especially the least of them, with kindness, compassion, humility, and love. it's just the capstone of all of his teaching in Matthew in some ways.
Hey, thank you for making that connection. That you're so right. And you think back to what we looked at in Matthew 5, the Beatitudes, and blessed are they, and you're like, well, why are they blessed? And then there's a short explanation following there on the Sermon on the Mount. But now the bookend, right, it starts with blessed are. Here, what is our blessing? Our blessing is the reward. The reward, the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. Well, here's how you get to the kingdom of heaven. Do these things. You've got talents. God has given them to you. Do these things. You've got money. Use it wisely. God has given these things to you. What am I supposed to do? How do I become blessed? Well, do these things. So I think it's a really nice bookend. And you're absolutely right. This is the last teaching, verse chapter 26, that we're about to move into. And that was my conclusion here. God expects us to act in love and will judge us accordingly. As we move into chapter 26, it really is all about not Jesus teaching anymore, specifically. It's more about here's all the things that are happening to Jesus, really kind of out of his control, and yet I'm assuming I will definitely do this, but I'm assuming Daniel will too. Here are all the prophecies that are going to be fulfilled, and that just everything they do to try to kill him and make him go away just goes to fulfilling the prophecies that were foretold about him in the Old Testament, that then just seals this is of course the Son of God. So what a great way, even though it feels a little down as far as the separation of the righteous and not, it's a really nice bookend to Matthew chapter 5, right, with the Beatitudes. So, okay, that's all I've got for tonight. Thank you all very much. We will pick up on Sunday in person, Lord willing. So see you then. The building is ready.